Dembélé.
Avec mon meilleur ami, depuis 4-5 ans, on a tout vécu ensemble. On a tout fait ensemble. Il m'a suivi partout. Et voilà, jusqu'à la fin, on sera ensemble, lui et moi. En tout cas, merci à tous et bonne soirée.
Paris was a mirror of gold that night. Every streetlight a coin, every balcony a witness, every window a quiet gasp held in the dark. The theater hummed like a living instrument, strings tightening, cameras warming, tuxedos drawing in breath as if oxygen itself were a secret reserved for the anointed. And at the center of that carefully staged storm, Ousmane Dembélé stepped forward and raised the Ballon d'Or. The trophy caught a constellation and threw it back at the room. People say a single image can explain a life. They are wrong. It takes two. Because a few rows behind the spotlight, half swallowed by shadow, a man pressed his thumb and forefinger to the ridge of his nose and blinked hard, as if tears were a translation he wasn't ready to read aloud. His name was Moustapha Diatta, the friend who is always there in the photos if you know where to look, the voice that never makes the interview cut, the gravity that doesn't need to announce itself to keep a universe in orbit. If a night like this ever belonged to one person, it would not be this one. This night had two owners, one with boots, one with belief. They met where legends aren't supposed to be born, Évreux, Normandy, where the afternoon wind smells faintly of wet concrete and cut grass, and the evenings feel like someone drew a curtain with gentle hands. Two boys, two mismatched balls, a pair of chipped goalposts that leaned inward like they were whispering to each other. Ousmane moved with the rumor of speed before the sprint even began. Hips like hinges, knees like conspirators, the ball attached to him by invisible thread. Moustapha watched angles, heard rhythms, and kept time like a drummer nobody notices until the band stops. And you understand what holds a song together. After school, after chores, after the last neighbor pulled laundry from the balcony, they met on the same square of stubborn ground and traded futures under their breath. One day, Ousmane said, balancing a scuffed ball on the bridge of his foot. One day, Moustapha replied, eyes on the horizon that begins in the chest. There were afternoons so hot the metal benches seared the backs of their legs, and days so wet the pitch became a map of small seas, each puddle a defender waiting to steal possession. They'd play until the light bruised into purple and the air turned to breath you could hold. When the laces gave out, they tied them together with fishing line. When the seam split, they patched it with a needle borrowed from a grandmother who had mended more lives than sweaters. You'll be late for dinner, a mother would call from a window, and they'd promise to come, then promise again. The echo of promise, a ritual more binding than any contract later in life. The first letter from Rennes arrived like a dare in an envelope. Inked names, crisp assurances, the future trimmed and stapled to a date. The city felt far even on a map, and farther when they packed. Ousmane folded shirts with the careful slowness of someone touching the next version of himself. Moustapha rolled tape around the old Évreux ball and slid it into the bottom of a duffel like smugglers hiding treasure. You're coming? Ousmane asked, a question already decided. Where else would I be? Moustapha answered, which is how brothers speak when their route is a single line. Rennes gave them structure and loneliness in equal measure. The academy woke at hours that made dawn look lazy. The corridors echoed with boots and ambition. The cafeteria smelled of reheated promises and too much coffee. At night, the apartment had a silence that asked questions. Respectable people underestimate silence. It keeps a ledger. If you don't answer, it answers for you. Ousmane was learning systems, pressing triggers, passing lanes, how to be a gear that didn't slip when the machine demanded precision. He missed Évreux like you miss the second half of your own name. Some evenings the doubt spoke first. Maybe you're a street trick, not a stadium player. Maybe your instincts are too wild for grown men's football. That's when Moustapha would put a pan on the little electric stove, fry eggs in olive oil, let the kitchen fill with the comforting noise of small work and say, you don't need to become them. Learn the rules so you can break them at the right second. But don't amputate your gift to fit a system built for average. He became the morning alarm and the late-night debrief, the extra sprint counter, and the listener who didn't insist on solutions. He learned ankle taping from videos and from the humble science of trial and error. He learned which words loosen a knot in the stomach and which songs remind a body that it knows how to move even when it hurts. He learned that greatness requires an accomplice, not to cheat, but to remember. Germany was a shock of yellow and thunder. Dortmund made noise even when it slept. The Süd Tribune sang, and the sound folded itself into the marrow. Here, football felt less like a game and more like a language with too many dialects. Tactical, physical, spiritual. Ousmane's dribble spoke all three at once. There were runs that looked illegal until the referee didn't blow the whistle, and touches that seemed to gather space into a tight fist and open it somewhere else. Reporters began to arrive, curious and breathless. They wrote, they praised, they waited. Praise is an animal that eats more than you expect it to. If you don't feed it, it bites. If you feed it too much, it sleeps on your chest and you can't breathe. Then the first hamstring whispered. A quiet thread pulled through muscle until the cloth bunched strangely and wouldn't lie flat. The sprint wanted more than the body could give that day, and suddenly the calendar became a battlefield of dates with red circles and too many careful verbs. Rehab, reassess, return. Glass, someone wrote in a headline. It's interesting how easily people label what they've never carried. A word like that can lodge in the fear between two heartbeats and make a home if you're not careful. On the coldest nights, with German winter pressing its blue face to the window, Ousmane paced the narrow living room in socks and said things men only say to people who will not weaponize them. Maybe I'm the trailer everyone makes too big a deal about, and the film is nothing. Moustapha took out the Évreux ball, leather crazed like riverbeds in drought, and rolled it with his left foot until the sound of it crossing tile became metronomic. You don't owe anyone proof, he said. You owe yourself patience. But patience isn't passive. It trains while it waits. Barcelona was silk and knives. The city a postcard pretending it doesn't cut. The club a cathedral whose incense is expectation. The training pitches smelled of grass sharpened to razors. The first touch had to be a thesis. The second, a verdict. The hamstring, still wary, asked for negotiation every week. Rehab became a church. Elastic bands for stained glass. Foam rollers for pews. There were nights when the world outside was music and neon, and they watched it from a balcony like men watching the sea from shore, knowing they could swim but choosing not to drown. Sometimes they spoke of nothing, because nothing is a place where the soul can stretch without tearing. Sometimes they spoke of everything. If I can't run, who am I? Ousmane asked once. You're the reason you can run, Moustapha said. The legs are instruments. The song is here, and he tapped the left side of his chest. Not for romance, but for maps. People noticed the friend because people always notice the thing they can't categorize. Entourage, they said, a word that flatters and dismisses at the same time. In Évreux, the word for him was different. Guardian. You don't need a credential to be that. You need attentiveness and stubbornness and a love that isn't keeping score. When Adidas came with a camera and an idea called You Got This, they took a train back home and found the old square of asphalt partially repainted, partially itself. Children pressed their faces between the fence bars. A grandmother in a blue coat watched with an expression that had both pride and appraisal. The lens drew a circle around two boys who had dared not to grow apart, one whose feet had become a country of their own, one whose presence had become the weather of that country. Back on the train, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft theater of strangers' lives in motion, they laughed. They think it's a story about resilience, Ousmane said. It is, Moustapha replied, but resilience is a duet. And because life rarely obeys narrative, there were more setbacks. Second halves where the rhythm never arrived. Mornings when the hamstring negotiated in bad faith. Half smiles in mixed zones that felt like masks. On a Tuesday in March, they cooked rice with chickpeas and cumin in a pan too small for the recipe, and the kitchen filled with steam that made the tiny room look like a miracle trying to appear. We keep going, Moustapha said, and it wasn't a slogan. It was a daily bread. Then came a season that braided luck and labor so tight you couldn't tell which strand was which. From August to May, passes started arriving on time like trains in a city that suddenly remembered how to run. The first touch wrote poems. The second took scalps politely. There were goals with the humor of magic tricks and assists that felt like apologies for past absences. In training, teammates read his shoulder angles and rerouted their runs because they trusted the grammar of his hips. Coaches lowered their voices, as if volume might frighten away whatever delicate animal was nesting there. Opponents learned that it only takes one touch to make a wrong decision look like destiny. And under all that visible music, the invisible metronome, Moustapha, who never clapped loud enough to distract, never spoke long enough to lose the thread, never let a day go by without making sure the floor under everything stayed level. People outside football like to think awards are won on Sunday nights. They are, in fact, won on Mondays, in the gray time between breakfast and the second drill, when a choice is made, again, to polish the small thing no camera cares about. The calls and whispers and lists began to form, the gossip that floats like pollen and makes certain rooms sneeze. A journalist asked, off record, if the narrative had turned. Another asked, on record, if the body had finally learned its lines. Bodies don't learn, Ousmane said later in the car. They remember. So do cities, Moustapha answered, watching the skyline bend and unbend like a promise. The invitation came printed on paper heavy enough to be a statement. The suit fittings turned into small comedies because tuxedos assume a man stands still. The mother cried on the phone, and then again in person, because some emotions need rehearsal and performance. Old coaches texted simple sentences. Proud of you. Keep your feet. Bring us with you. The night of the Ballon d'Or. The backstage smelled of flowers and nerves. Producers checked their clipboards like doctors. Presenters practiced emphasis in the glass reflections of display cases that held other trophies like sleeping lions. He stepped into the auditorium with his mother on one side and his brother in everything on the other. The carpet might as well have been Évreux asphalt dyed red by ceremony. They found their seats. The orchestra's first note arrived and tested the ceiling for weakness. The jokes and montages did what they always do, made time wear a tuxedo. But when the envelope appeared, time undressed and stood in the room without shame. A name is a quiet bomb when detonated correctly. The syllables found the air and rearranged it. He stood. The hug with his mother was both old and brand new. The brief lean into Moustapha's shoulder was the grip of rock climbers who have reached a ledge together and don't need to discuss which hand saved which. Up the steps, across the small country of stage floor, toward a sun trapped in glass. He held it and felt the weight that photos can't capture. The gravity of votes, the density of years. The shape of stubbornness crystallized. He spoke. The words weren't polished to death. They were alive. He thanked teams and cities and stadiums and kitchens. He said his mother's name, and it produced an ovation you can't command, only invite. And then he said the name that wasn't on any official list. This belongs to Moustapha, too. If sound had a temperature, the room warmed by several degrees. Down in the velvet dark, a man let his defenses lose on purpose. The tears were not spectacle. They were arithmetic. 1 + 1 = this. Around him, some clapped harder, sensing a truth even without a backstory. Others looked at their programs, as if a footnote might explain why a stranger's name could move the air. But most simply looked at the stage, and understood that even if football is 11 versus 11 on a rectangle of grass, life is almost always 2 versus everything else. After, the corridors became rivers. Congratulations behave like water. They find the easiest path downhill and flood it. In a quieter corner where the exit made a right-angle decision, they stood side by side and remembered how to breathe with their mouths open. The trophy rested in its case like a domesticated star. We said we'd be here, Ousmane said. We didn't know the route, Moustapha answered. We didn't need to, came the reply. The way only men who have been lost together can joke about maps. They took photos that will live longer than all of them. One on stage, one by a wall of logos, one under the dim hotel lamp with plastic flowers on a fake mahogany table. In the last one, his mother holds the trophy like a watermelon from a market stall, and they laugh so hard you can hear it in the pixels. Later, they opened the window. Paris entered like a polite intruder with expensive shoes. Cars whispered. Somewhere a siren sang a single note, then changed its mind. The city can be cruel to people who don't know the shape of their own center. That night, it felt like a room where everyone spoke the same language at the same volume. Meanwhile, Évreux turned the news into a local weather event. The baker shook flour into the air like confetti. A teacher who had once given an essay a generous grade watched the highlights between classes and decided to suspend homework for 72 hours. Academic mercy in the face of civic joy. On the patched asphalt that had birthed 1,000 low-stakes finals, a boy in a too-big jacket cut inside a cousin whispered, Dembele, and then, as if revealing the punchline to a joke that still surprises him, added, Diatta, and the ball obeyed. Of course, the calendar did not bend forever. Tuesday arrived with cones and drills, and the ordinary miracle of repetition. A league game demanded its humility tax. A headline tried to be cruel and failed. smiled, because the words no longer found soft tissue. The trophy went on a shelf, then off it for a quick photo sent to a cousin, then back up out of reach of toddlers who deserve trust but not that much. The difference now was structural. The floor under their lives had been poured smooth and set. It would hold. Who is Moustapha Diatta in the biography of a public man? The easiest answer steals clarity. Best friend, loyal companion, the shadow that keeps shape. But ease is rarely truth. The truth is that he was the architect of a private weather system in which talent could grow without freezing or burning. He understood the chemistry of belief, how it ferments in silence, how it needs both sugar and time, how too much noise can kill the yeast. He was the man who said no on behalf of someone who didn't want to seem ungrateful, the man who said yes when fear rehearsed the opposite, the man who carried bags and burdens and secrets and never asked for receipts. If a myth insists that one name wins the Ballon d'Or, let this be a countermyth. Sometimes trophies are joint custody even when the engraving knife doesn't admit it. The world will keep trying to photograph greatness alone because single subjects are easier to frame. But stand in the edges of the picture, and you will see the hand on the shoulder, the nod at the corner flag, the extra plate on the table at midnight. You will see the invisible passes that never register on any stats page, the ones that travel across kitchens and train compartments and rehab rooms. You will see, if you're paying attention, that the most decisive dribble of the night happened years earlier, in Évreux, when one boy dodged every adult expectation and chose to believe in another boy instead. There are moments that belong to narrative, and moments that belong to evidence. The evidence is in the speed, the torque, the soft landing of a ball on a lace, the split-second vision that turns a narrow corridor into a ballroom. The narrative is in the ordinary courage of repeating those gifts in the face of injury, boredom, and the loud opinions of people who will never run a sprint they claim to measure. Somewhere between the two is where Moustapha did his work. He did it for no audience. That is why it lasted. On quiet mornings, long after the cameras forgot to remember, the two of them still walked the perimeter of empty pitches and counted breaths. Sometimes they spoke of responsibility like it was a guest at the table, welcome, but not allowed to dominate conversation. Sometimes they spoke of how to spend an afternoon with their mothers without turning it into content. Once, after an early training that turned painful for no reason at all, they sat on a bench with their backs to the touchline. A sparrow hopped near their shoes, brave and ridiculous. "We used to name birds," Ousmane said. "We used to name everything," Moustapha answered, and for a minute they were 10 again, inventing worlds out of boredom and hunger. And because every story deserves a coda, return with me to a hallway in an old apartment where the paint refuses to choose between cream and yellow. The Évreux ball sits on a high shelf like an altarpiece. Its leather is cracked into a map so complicated even gods would get lost. Sometimes, before a big match, a hand reaches up, pulls it down, and holds it the way you hold a memory that still has a pulse. "You got this," someone says, not as a slogan, but as a diagnosis. The ball is rolled across tile. It returns with a soft, foolish sound. They both smile. Then the door opens, and the world, demanding and generous and impatient and somehow always right on time, waits at the stairwell. So, when the photo appears on a timeline, and you see a man lifting gold while the room decides what to feel about it, try to hold two images at once: the stage and the playground, the suit and the torn tracksuit, the headline and the recipe for rice and chickpeas, the applause and the hush of a kitchen at 2 a.m. when a friend says the thing that keeps a life from giving up on itself. Remember that destinies look singular only from far away. Up close, they reveal their seams, stitches of kindness, patches of patience, thread pulled by hands that never asked to be seen. That night in Paris, the Ballon d'Or turned the color of memory. The city listened, the crowd stood, and in the third row, a man cried the truest tears of the evening, because he knew, down to the exact weight of the moment, that the climb had always been a team of two. Years from now, when the gold has dulled a little the way all medals do when they finally agree to belong to time, someone will point at the photo and say, "He did it." If you are there, if you have read all the way to the edge of this story, correct them gently. Say, "They did." Then tell them about Évreux, about the ball with the stitched seam, about the train rides and the rehab bands, about the laughter under fluorescent lights, about the campaign that brought cameras to a playground and accidentally filmed a truth, about a hallway where a boy turned a promise into a ritual. Tell them that in a world obsessed with singular brightness, the most reliable light comes from two stars traveling together, each keeping the other from falling out of its path. Because if football is a cathedral where every Sunday delivers a new sermon. Then this is its quiet theology. No one wears a crown alone, even when the crown is a ball made of light. And if you look closely, past the tuxedos, past the speeches, past the montage that makes chaos seem elegant, you'll see it. A hand on a shoulder, a nod, a breath drawn together, the smallest agreement. We don't stop. That is how you win a night like this. That is how you keep it. And somewhere, right now, on a damp patch of concrete in a town most maps try to ignore, two new boys are making a pact as sacred as any oath carved in stone. They are kicking a ball held together by the prettiest kind of stubbornness. One is fast, one is certain. They don't know the route. They don't need to. The future is already answering to their names.